Emma counted her $3 one more time, knowing it wasn't enough for even the smallest cake in the window, knowing her paralyzed legs had already cost her father everything. When the bakery owner looked up and recognized the broken man standing behind her wheelchair, the color drained from his face. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The 3 crumpled dollar bills in Emma's small hand represented everything. They were the coins her father had found in the couch cushions that morning, the quarters she had saved from her allowance over 2 months, the single bill her little brother Tommy had contributed from his piggy bank without being asked. $3. That was all they had for her 9th birthday. And as she sat in her wheelchair outside Henderson's bakery, watching the golden afternoon light spill across the display window, Emma knew it wasn't enough. The cakes inside were works of art. Towering confections decorated with buttercream roses, chocolate ganache dripping down the sides like waterfalls, vanilla layers so tall they seemed to touch the ceiling. Each one had a small white card with elegant script displaying prices that made her stomach twist. $25, $35, $45 for the elaborate Princess Castle cake that seemed to shimmer under the warm bakery lights. Emma looked down at her $3 and felt the familiar weight of disappointment settle over her shoulders like a too heavy coat. She had been in this wheelchair for 18 months now, ever since the accident that had stolen so much from their family. The drunk driver who ran the red light had taken her mother's life, and Emma's ability to walk in a single horrifying moment. Her father, Marcus Hayes, had transformed overnight from a successful architect into a man barely treading water, working 3 part-time jobs to keep their small apartment and pay the medical bills that arrived like clockwork, each one a reminder of everything they had lost. Emma didn't ask for much anymore. She had learned quickly that wishes were expensive and hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. But it was her birthday, and somewhere deep in the part of her heart that still remembered being a regular 9-year-old girl, she had dared to want something. Just a small cake. Nothing fancy. Just something that said today mattered, that she mattered, that despite everything, there was still sweetness to be found in the world. The bell above the bakery door chimed, and Emma watched as a woman emerged carrying a pink box tied with white ribbon. The woman was laughing, talking on her phone about a surprise party, about how perfect everything would be. Emma felt a sharp stab of envy so intense it took her breath away. She wondered what it felt like to worry about whether a cake was perfect rather than whether you could afford one at all. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Tommy, her 7-year-old brother, came running up, his backpack bouncing against his small shoulders. Their father walked a few paces behind, his work uniform dusty from his shift at the construction site. Even from a distance, Emma could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He was only 34. But he looked a decade older, worn down by grief and responsibility and the relentless weight of trying to be both mother and father to 2 children who needed more than he could give. Marcus Hayes had once been the kind of man who wore tailored suits and designed beautiful buildings. He had talked about light and space and creating structures that made people feel something when they walked inside. Now he talked about overtime shifts and whether they could afford new shoes for Tommy before winter. The accident had stolen his wife, but poverty was stealing his spirit, one humiliating day at a time. Tommy grabbed the handles of Emma's wheelchair without being asked, a gesture so automatic it broke her heart. He was too young to be this responsible, too young to understand that while other kids his age were worried about video games and playground politics, he was helping his sister navigate a world that wasn't built for wheelchairs and watching his father slowly disappear under the weight of their circumstances. Marcus reached them, and the smile he forced onto his face was so obviously fake that Emma almost told him not to bother. But she knew he needed it more than she did. This pretense that everything was okay, that they were still a family that celebrated birthdays with cake and candles and joy. "Ready to pick out something special, princess?" he asked, and his voice cracked just slightly on the word princess. It was what her mother used to call her. Emma held up the $3. "Daddy, I don't think this is enough." She watched something break behind his eyes. A tiny fracture in the dam he had built to hold back his own despair. He knelt down beside her wheelchair, and she could smell the concrete dust on his clothes, see the fresh scrape on his knuckle where he had caught his hand on something sharp at the work site. "We'll make it work," he said. But they both knew he was lying. "Come on, let's go see what they have." Tommy pushed her wheelchair toward the door, and Marcus held it open. The bell chimed their arrival, a bright, cheerful sound that felt like mockery. Inside, the bakery was warm and smelled like sugar and vanilla and all the sweetness that existed in a world they could no longer afford to participate in. The display cases gleamed under carefully positioned lights, each shelf a gallery of impossible things. Behind the counter stood a man Emma had never seen before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-50s. With silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He wore a white apron dusted with flour, and he was carefully piping delicate frosting flowers onto a 3-tiered wedding cake. His hands moved with the precision of an artist, each petal perfect, each leaf exactly right. He looked up as they entered, and Emma saw his gaze move from her face to her wheelchair to her father's worn work uniform to the 3 crumpled dollars still clutched in her hand. She braced herself for the look she had grown to recognize over the past 18 months, that mixture of pity and discomfort that made her feel like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be seen. But the look that crossed the baker's face was different. It was surprise, then something else. Recognition. His eyes widened, and the piping bag in his hand trembled slightly, sending a small blob of pink frosting onto the counter. "Marcus?" he said, and his voice was rough with an emotion Emma couldn't identify. "Marcus Hayes? Is that really you?" Her father had frozen in the doorway, his hand still on Tommy's shoulder. The color had drained from his face, and for a moment Emma thought he might turn around and walk back out. But then something shifted in his expression, a complicated tangle of emotions that Emma was too young to fully understand. "David," her father whispered, and the single word carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. "David Chun. I thought you moved to Seattle. I thought I heard you left town years ago." The baker, David Chun, set down his piping bag with exaggerated care as if he didn't trust his hands to hold it steady. He walked around the counter, wiping his palms on his apron, and stopped a few feet from Marcus. The two men stared at each other across the gleaming tile floor of the bakery, and the silence between them was so heavy Emma could almost see it. "I came back," David finally said, 5 years ago. "Bought this place from old Henderson when he retired. I kept meaning to look you up to reach out, but single quotes," he trailed off, his eyes sliding away. "Time got away from me. That's a coward's excuse, I know." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said, but his voice was strained, tight. Emma looked from her father to the baker and back again, trying to understand the current of history flowing between them. Tommy, oblivious to the adult complexities, had wandered over to the display case and was pressing his nose against the glass, his breath fogging up a small circle as he stared longingly at a chocolate cake covered in rainbow sprinkles. David's gaze dropped to Emma in her wheelchair, and this time, the look on his face was pure, uncomplicated compassion. "And who is this beautiful young lady?" he asked. "This is Emma," Marcus said, his hand resting on her shoulder. "It's her birthday today. She's 9. The unspoken rest of the sentence hung in the air, and we can barely afford to mark the occasion. David smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes. 9 years old. That's a very important birthday. The last one before double digits. He knelt down so he was at her eye level, his knees cracking slightly. "What kind of cake does a 9-year-old girl dream about, Emma?" She wanted to say she didn't dream about cakes anymore, that she had learned not to want things. But something about the kindness in his eyes made her honest. "I like vanilla," she whispered, "with strawberries, but we only have $3, so I understand if that's not enough." David Chun felt his heart crack open like an egg. The old guilt he had carried for 15 years suddenly rushing back with the force of a flood. He looked at this little girl in her wheelchair, holding her 3 crumpled dollars like they were treasure, and he saw the ghost of the man Marcus Hayes used to be reflected in her brave, hopeful eyes. He saw what life had done to his old friend, the way poverty and tragedy had carved away everything that wasn't absolutely essential, leaving behind only the raw, exhausted core of a father trying desperately to hold his family together. 15 years ago, Marcus Hayes had saved David's life, not in the dramatic, cinematic way where someone pulls you from a burning building, but in the quieter, more profound way that actually matters. David had been 28 years old, drowning in gambling debt, his bakery on the verge of foreclosure, his marriage falling apart, his entire life circling the drain. He'd been sitting in his car in Marcus's driveway at 2 in the morning, the engine running, seriously contemplating just driving away and never coming back, leaving it all behind, leaving his wife, his newborn daughter, his crushing failures. Marcus had found him there. They had been friends since college, and Marcus had somehow known, the way true friends do, that David was in trouble. He had knocked on the car window, and when David finally rolled it down, Marcus hadn't said anything about running away or being a coward. He had just said, "Come inside. Sarah made too much chili and it's going to waste." That night had changed everything. Over bowls of homemade chili at the Hayes kitchen table, Marcus had listened to David's confession, the shame and fear and self-loathing pouring out in a torrent of words. And when David had finally fallen silent, empty and defeated, Marcus had looked him in the eye and said something David had never forgotten. "You think you're broken beyond repair, but I've seen broken things. I've designed buildings that looked like they couldn't stand. And then I found the right support, the right foundation, and they became beautiful. You're not broken, David. You're just carrying too much weight on the wrong supports. Let me help you redistribute the load." Marcus had co-signed a loan when no bank would give David the time of day. He had referred him to a counselor who specialized in addiction. He had shown up at David's bakery every Saturday morning for 6 months, helping him rebuild his business from the ground up, refusing payment, refusing thanks, just quietly, steadfastly being there. Marcus Hayes had believed in him when David had stopped believing in himself, and that belief had been the foundation David had built his entire second chance on. And then David had moved to Seattle for what he thought was a better opportunity. He had promised to stay in touch. He had meant to call, to write, to maintain the friendship that had saved his life. But shame is a powerful silencer. The better David's life became, the more successful his bakery in Seattle grew, the harder it became to reach out to Marcus. What do you say to the man who saved you when you've prospered and he's drowning? How do you maintain a friendship when the scales are so dramatically imbalanced? So David had let the silence grow. He had told himself Marcus was fine, that he had his beautiful wife and his architecture firm and his perfect life. And then, 5 years ago, when David moved back to his hometown to buy Henderson's Bakery and be closer to his aging parents, he had heard the whispers about the accident, about Sarah Hayes dying, about Marcus losing everything. And instead of reaching out, instead of being the friend Marcus had been to him, David had hidden behind the excuse of not wanting to intrude, not knowing what to say. He had told himself he was giving Marcus space, but the truth was much simpler and much more shameful. He had been a coward, and now, 15 years later, here was Marcus standing in his bakery, worn down by life, with his paralyzed daughter holding $3 and asking for a birthday cake with heartbreaking politeness. The universe had just given David a chance at redemption, and he was not going to waste it. He stood up from his crouch, his knees protesting, and looked at Emma with the most genuine smile he could manage. $3, you say? Well, that's a very interesting coincidence. Do you know what today is, Emma, besides your birthday? Emma shook her head, her long brown hair swaying slightly. Today, David said, walking back behind the counter with purpose, is the 10th anniversary of the day this bakery almost closed forever. The day I almost gave up on everything. And do you know who saved it? Who saved me? He looked directly at Marcus, who had gone very still. Your father did, Dot. Single quotes. Marcus's face flushed. David, don't. That was a long time ago. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me, David said firmly. It matters every single day I wake up and come to this bakery that exists because you believe. He opened the display case and began carefully removing a beautiful white cake, smaller than the towering confections but exquisitely decorated with fresh strawberries and delicate vanilla buttercream flowers. It was exactly the kind of cake a 9-year-old girl might dream about. David, we can't accept that, Marcus said, his voice strained. We came here to buy a cake. I'm not looking for charity. This isn't charity, David replied, setting the cake on the counter. This is paying a debt. This is honoring a friendship. This is acknowledging that I owed you 15 years of birthday cakes, and I'm finally making good on the first one. He began carefully placing 9 pink candles around the edge, each one positioned with the precision of a man who had spent his life making beautiful things. Emma's eyes had grown wide, filling with tears she was clearly trying very hard not to shed. Is that really for me? She whispered. It's really for you, David confirmed. Vanilla cake with fresh strawberry filling and real buttercream frosting. I made it this morning, actually. Sometimes I just make cakes because they're beautiful. And I had a feeling this one was meant for someone special. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that heals rather than harms. Tommy had abandoned the display case and come over to stand beside his sister's wheelchair, his eyes as wide as saucers. That's the prettiest cake I've ever seen, he breathed. Marcus stood frozen, his jaw working as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. His eyes were shining with unshed tears, and David recognized the look on his face. It was the same expression David had worn 15 years ago, sitting at that kitchen table confronted with undeserved kindness. It was the look of a man whose pride was warring with his desperate gratitude, a man who had been fighting alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have an ally. Marcus, David said quietly, meeting his old friend's eyes across the counter. Please, let me do this. You taught me once that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You taught me that we're not meant to carry everything alone. Let me give you back some of the grace you gave me. The silence stretched between them, thick with history and emotion. Emma looked up at her father, and David saw the hope and fear warring in her young face. She wanted this so badly, this simple birthday cake, but she was also old enough to sense her father's struggle, to understand that there were complex adult emotions at play that she couldn't fully grasp. Finally, Marcus took a deep, shuddering breath. When he spoke, his voice was rough. On one condition. You let me pay the $3. Not because I don't appreciate what you're doing, but because Emma saved this money. She needs to know that her contribution matters, that she's not just receiving charity. She's a customer buying something she wants. David understood immediately. It was about dignity. It was about teaching Emma that she had agency, that her small contribution had value. He nodded slowly. That's the wisest $3 I'll ever earn. Emma wheeled herself forward, her small hand extended with the crumpled bills. David took them with all the solemnity of a sacred transaction. He carefully smoothed them out and placed them in the register. Then he looked at Emma and said, Young lady, you have just purchased the finest vanilla strawberry cake in this entire bakery. Thank you for your business. The smile that broke across Emma's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of pure, uncomplicated joy. It transformed her entirely, erasing for just a moment all the pain and hardship that had aged her beyond her 9 years. She looked like what she was supposed to be, just a little girl on her birthday, excited about cake and candles and the small magic of being celebrated. "Can I pick it up?" Tommy asked, bouncing on his toes. "Very carefully," David said, sliding the cake across the counter in its pristine white box. He had added the ribbon while they were talking, a bright yellow bow that matched Emma's wheelchair. Tommy carried the cake box like it was made of spun glass and ancient promises, his small arms wrapped around it with an intensity that made David's chest ache. Marcus stood by the door, one hand on Emma's wheelchair, and the look on his face was something David would remember for the rest of his life. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, more complex. Relief mixed with shame, mixed with a desperate, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cold and indifferent as the last 18 months had taught him it was. But David wasn't finished. He had spent 15 years letting his cowardice masquerade as respect for boundaries, and he was done with that particular lie. He came around the counter, wiping his hands on his apron, and before Marcus could react, he pulled him into a tight embrace. He felt Marcus stiffen, felt the initial resistance of a man who had learned to hold everyone at arm's length because letting people close meant giving them the power to hurt you. But then, slowly, Marcus's arms came up and he hugged David back, and for just a moment, they were two college friends again before tragedy and debt and the cruel mathematics of adult life had driven them apart. When they pulled away, both men's eyes were suspiciously bright. David cleared his throat. "I want you to know something, Marcus. That loan you co-signed all those years ago, I paid it off in full 6 years ago. Every penny, with interest. I've been meaning to tell you, to thank you properly, but I kept putting it off like the coward I am." "You're not a coward," Marcus said quietly. "You came back. You built something good here. That takes courage." "No," David said firmly. "Running away was cowardice. Not reaching out when I came back was cowardice, but this..." He gestured to the cake Tommy was holding, to Emma's radiant smile, to the moment they were all sharing. "This is me trying to be brave. This is me trying to be the kind of friend you were to me." He took a deep breath and plunged forward before he could talk himself out of it. "How are you doing, Marcus? Really, not the polite answer you give strangers. The truth." Marcus's face went through a complicated series of expressions. For a moment, David thought he might deflect, might offer some sanitized version of his reality, but something in the quiet safety of the bakery, in the presence of an old friend who already knew him at his worst, made Marcus choose honesty instead. "I'm drowning," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I work construction during the day, stock shelves at a warehouse 3 nights a week, and do freelance drafting on the weekends when I can stay awake long enough. Emma needs physical therapy that insurance doesn't fully cover. Tommy needs things kids need, shoes that fit and school supplies, and a childhood that isn't defined by poverty. I'm holding it together with duct tape and stubbornness, and most days I'm not sure which is going to give out first. My body or my mind." The words tumbled out like a confession, and David saw Emma's face change, saw the guilt that flickered across it. She had known things were hard, but hearing her father articulate it so plainly was clearly painful. Her small hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair, her knuckles going white. "I'm sorry, Princess," Marcus said, immediately noticing her distress. "I shouldn't have said all that. Today's supposed to be about celebrating." "I know we're poor, Daddy," Emma said, her voice small but steady. "I'm not a baby. I know you work all the time. I know Tommy gave me his piggy bank money and that he wanted that new action figure, but he gave me the money instead. I know I cost a lot because of my wheelchair, my therapy, and all the doctor appointments." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know it's my fault." "Stop." Marcus dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair, his hands cupping her face gently. "Emma, you listen to me right now. None of this is your fault. Not one single thing. You hear me? You are not a burden. You are the reason I get up every morning. You and Tommy are the reason I keep fighting. The drunk driver who hit us, he's the one at fault. The insurance companies that deny coverage, they're at fault. The world that makes healthcare impossibly expensive and refuses to build ramps where wheelchairs can go, that's what's at fault. But you are innocent and perfect, and I would work 100 jobs to make sure you know you're loved." David felt like he was intruding on something sacred. This moment of pure parental love laid bare. Tommy had set the cake box down on a nearby table and wrapped his arms around both his father and sister, a small, fierce protector trying to hold his broken family together with sheer willpower. David turned away, pretending to organize something behind the counter, giving them a moment of privacy while his mind raced. He thought about his own daughter, Jennifer, who was 21 now and finishing college without a care in the world beyond which graduate program to choose. He thought about the comfortable life he had built on the foundation Marcus had given him, the security and stability that allowed him to worry about whether his bakery's Instagram presence was strong enough rather than whether he could feed his family. The distance between Marcus's life and his own was a chasm, and it was utterly unfair. An idea was forming in David's mind, something that felt both obvious and terrifying. It was a big gesture, the kind that could be misinterpreted as pity or charity, the kind that could damage what was left of Marcus's pride. But David had learned something important in his own journey through rock bottom and back. Sometimes pride was the enemy of survival. Sometimes accepting help was the bravest thing you could do. He turned back around. The Hayes family had composed themselves, wiping away tears and putting on brave faces. Emma was smiling again, determined to salvage her birthday celebration. "Can we go home and eat the cake now?" she asked. "Absolutely," Marcus said, standing up. His knees cracked. a sound that made David wince. The man was 34 but moved like someone much older, his body already breaking down from too much manual labor and too little rest. Thank you again, David, for everything. This meant more than you know. Wait, David said, the word coming out more forcefully than he intended. Before you go, I have a proposition, a business proposition. Marcus looked wary. David, I appreciate what you've done, but I can't accept more charity. It's not charity, David said, and he realized as he spoke that it was true. What he was about to offer wasn't about pity. It was about making things right, about creating the kind of world he wanted to live in. I need help, real help. This bakery has grown a lot in the past year and I'm drowning in orders. I need someone with design skills, someone who understands structure and aesthetics and can help me expand my custom cake business. You design buildings, Marcus. You understand three-dimensional space and load-bearing structures and how to make something beautiful and functional. He could see Marcus starting to protest, so he pushed on. I need someone who can create templates for wedding cakes, design specialty cakes that are architectural marvels, someone who can help me market to high-end clients, maybe even help me redesign this space to be more efficient. I'll pay you $25 an hour, flexible schedule. You can work around your other jobs until we see if this is viable long-term. It was more than a fair offer. It was generous, and they both knew it. Marcus shook his head. I haven't done design work in almost 2 years. I don't even have a portfolio anymore. Everything was on my old computer that I had to sell. I don't need a portfolio, David said. I know your work. I saw what you built before. I know what you're capable of. And more importantly, I trust you. That's worth more than any portfolio. Marcus looked torn, wanting to believe, but afraid to hope. Why are you doing this? Really? David met his eyes steadily. Because 15 years ago, you taught me that there's no shame in accepting help. You taught me that we're all just one bad break away from needing someone to believe in us. You were that someone for me, and I've spent 15 years being successful and comfortable while telling myself I'd earned it all on my own, but I didn't earn it alone. I earned it standing on the foundation you helped me build, so this isn't charity, Marcus. This is me finally acknowledging that we're all connected, that your success back then enabled my success now. And maybe my stability now can help you find yours again. The silence in the bakery was profound. Emma was looking up at her father with enormous eyes, hope and fear battling across her young face. Tommy had picked up the cake box again, holding it protectively as if he could shield his family from more disappointment with pastry and frosting. Marcus's throat worked, and when he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. I need to think about it. I need to make sure I can actually deliver on what you're asking. I can't take your money if I'm not going to earn it. Fair enough, David said. Take the weekend. But Marcus, I'm serious about this. I'm not offering this to make myself feel good. I'm offering this because I genuinely need help and you genuinely have skills I need. This is a business decision that happens to also be the right thing to do. Marcus nodded slowly, and David could see the wheels turning in his mind, the careful calculation of a man who had learned the hard way that good things often came with hidden costs. But there was also something else there, a tiny ember of hope beginning to glow in the darkness of his exhaustion. Okay, Marcus finally said, I'll think about it. I'll call you Monday. Good, David said. And then, because he couldn't help himself, he added, and Marcus, happy birthday to your beautiful daughter. You raised her right. You're doing a better job than you think you are. The Hayes family apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days, in a neighborhood that was holding on to respectability by its fingernails. There was no elevator, which meant Marcus had to carry Emma up 3 flights of stairs while Tommy hauled the cake box in the wheelchair. It was a routine they had perfected over 18 months, a carefully choreographed dance of necessity that left Marcus's back screaming and Emma's face burning with humiliation every single time. She hated being carried, hated the way her father's breathing became labored by the 2nd flight, hated the way his arms trembled by the time they reached their door, hated the reminder that she was a burden no matter what kind words people spoke. The wheelchair could be folded and carried, her school books could be hauled up in a backpack, but she herself was dead weight that had to be transported like cargo, and every step was a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she cost. But today was her birthday and she had a beautiful cake waiting, so she wrapped her arms around her father's neck and tried to be as light as possible, tried to will herself to weigh less, tried to pretend that this was normal and fine and not slowly killing her father 1 flight of stairs at a time. Their apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms and a cramped living area with a kitchenette that barely deserved the name, but it was clean. Marcus made sure of that, and there were small touches that spoke of a family that had once been different. A framed photograph of Emma's mother, Sarah, laughing in a garden, her dark curls catching the sunlight, a shelf of well-worn books that no one had time to read anymore, a blanket Sarah had crocheted, now faded and threadbare, draped over the second-hand couch. Marcus settled Emma into her wheelchair and immediately went to wash his hand, not because they were dirty, but because it gave him a moment to catch his breath, to let the burning in his lungs and the ache in his back fade before his children could see how much it had cost him. Tommy had already set the cake box on the small kitchen table, the only piece of furniture that had survived the move from their old house, and was bouncing with barely contained excitement. Can we eat it now? Can we, please? Tommy begged. Absolutely, Marcus said, pulling out plates that didn't match and forks from the drawer. It's Emma's birthday. We're gonna do this right. He rummaged through a drawer and found a lighter, then carefully opened the cake box. The cake was even more beautiful than it had looked in the bakery. The strawberries glistening like rubies, the buttercream flowers perfect and delicate. David had done something special with the candles, arranging them in a pattern that spelled out Emma's name. It was a small detail, something he must have done while they were talking, and it made Marcus's throat tighten. He lit the candles, and the tiny flames cast a warm glow across his daughter's face. Tommy turned off the overhead light without being asked, and suddenly their shabby little kitchen was transformed into something magical. Emma's eyes reflected the candlelight, and for just a moment Marcus could see his wife in her face. The same wonder, the same capacity for joy despite everything. He started singing Happy Birthday, his voice rough and off-key. Tommy joined in, louder and more enthusiastic, his 7-year-old voice cracking on the high notes. Emma sat in her wheelchair surrounded by flickering candlelight and family, and Marcus watched as tears streamed down her face. But they weren't sad tears. They were the complicated tears of a child who had learned too early that happiness was precious and fleeting, and who knew enough to recognize it when it appeared. "Make a wish, princess," Marcus said softly. Emma closed her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration. Marcus wondered what she was wishing for. A cure for her paralysis? A mother who wasn't dead? A father who wasn't exhausted all the time? Money for the things they needed? The possibilities were endless and heartbreaking. She blew out the candles in one breath, and Tommy cheered. Marcus cut the cake, giving Emma the biggest piece with the most strawberries, and they ate it with the kind of focused appreciation that only comes from knowing how rare treats are. The cake was perfect, light and sweet, and everything a birthday cake should be. David had made it with skill and care, and every bite was a small mirror. "This is the best birthday ever," Emma said, her mouth full of cake, a smear of frosting on her chin. "It's the best cake ever," Tommy agreed, already reaching for seconds before Marcus could offer them. They ate until they were full, until the cake was half gone and they had to cover the rest with plastic wrap to save for later. Marcus made them brush their teeth, another ordinary moment of parenting that felt precious because it was normal. Because for just a few minutes they were a regular family doing regular things. Then he read them a story. Both kids crowded into Emma's bed because that's how they liked it. Tommy curled against his sister's side like a protective puppy. He read them one of Sarah's favorite books, Where the Wild Things Are, and he did all the voices the way she used to, the way the children expected. When he closed the book, Emma's eyes were heavy with sleep, and Tommy was already snoring softly. "Daddy?" Emma whispered as he was tucking the blanket around them. "Yeah, baby. Are you going to take Mr. Chun's job?" The question caught him off guard. He thought she'd been too focused on the cake to really absorb the conversation at the bakery. He should have known better. Emma missed nothing. She had learned to read the world with the hypervigilance of a child who knew her family's survival was always precarious. "I don't know yet," he admitted, sitting on the edge of her bed. "It's a big decision, but it would be good, right? You could work less. You could sleep more. Maybe we could afford things." She said it simply, without accusation, just stating facts the way she understood them. "Maybe," Marcus said carefully, "but I have to make sure I can actually do the work he needs. I don't want to let him down. He's being very kind to us, and I need to make sure it's the right kind of help." Emma reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused ones. "Mr. Chun seems nice, and he said you helped him a long time ago. Maybe it's okay to let him help you back. That's what friends do, right? They help each other, out of the mouths of babes." His 9-year-old daughter had just articulated what he had been struggling with since they left the bakery. Marcus had spent so long being the helper, being the strong one, being the man who had his life together, that he had forgotten how to be on the receiving end. He had forgotten that friendship was supposed to be reciprocal, that letting people help you was a gift you gave them, not just a weakness you exposed. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, his voice thick. "I learned it from Mom," Emma said, her eyes drifting closed. "She used to say that love is letting people show up for you, even when it's hard." Marcus sat there in the darkness, his daughter's hand in his, and let himself cry silently. Not the exhausted, desperate tears he sometimes shed in the shower where no one could hear him, but something cleaner, something that felt almost like healing. Sarah had said that. He remembered now. She had said it when she was sick, when she was dying, when she was trying to teach him how to live without her. He had spent 18 months trying to be strong enough to need no one, and it was killing him. He was 34 years old and his body felt twice that, working himself to death in slow motion. For what? To prove he could do it alone? To protect his pride? His daughter had just given him permission to be human, to accept help, to let an old friend show up for him the way he had once shown up for David. In the living room, Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at the business card David had pressed into his hand as they were leaving the bakery. The card was simple, elegant. Henderson's Bakery, now under new ownership, with David Chun's name and number in understated font. Marcus thought about the job offer, about designing cakes instead of hauling concrete blocks, about using his brain instead of destroying his body, about $25 an hour that could change everything. He thought about his pride, about the voice in his head that whispered he didn't deserve help, that he was a failure for needing it. And then he thought about Emma's face when she blew out her candles, about Tommy giving up his piggy bank money without being asked, about the fact that his children were growing up in poverty because he was too stubborn to accept a lifeline when it was offered. Marcus didn't wait until Monday. He texted David at 11 that night, sitting on his worn couch in the darkness, the glow of his phone screen the only light in the room. The message was simple: "I'll take the job. Thank you for believing in me." He hit send before he could talk himself out of it, before the voice of doubt and pride could convince him this was a mistake. David's response came back within 2 minutes. "Best news I've had all year. Come by Tuesday morning at 9. We'll talk details. And Marcus, thank you for letting me do this. Marcus. That night, Marcus slept better than he had in months. The crushing weight of hopelessness that had been pressing down on his chest for so long lifted just slightly, enough for him to breathe. He dreamed of his wife for the first time in weeks, and in the dream she was smiling, proud of him for finally doing what she had tried to teach him. Love is letting people show up for you, even when it's hard. Tuesday morning came bright and clear, one of those perfect autumn days when the air is crisp and the world feels full of possibility. Marcus dropped the kids at school, Tommy chattering excitedly about his sister's birthday cake and how everyone in his class had been jealous when he described it. Emma was quieter, but there was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before, a cautious optimism that made Marcus's heart ache with hope. He arrived at Henderson's Bakery at 8:55, his one good button-down shirt carefully ironed, his resume printed on paper he'd bought at the dollar store. It felt inadequate, this single sheet with its gaps and omissions, but it was all he had. The bell chimed as he entered, and the morning smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee wrapped around him like a welcome. David was waiting for him, 2 steaming mugs on the counter and a warm smile on his face. Right on time. I like that. He gestured to a small table in the corner away from the display cases. Come sit. Let's talk about what this could look like. For the next hour, they talked like they used to back in college, ideas flowing freely, building on each other's thoughts. David explained his vision for expanding the custom cake business, for targeting weddings and corporate events, for creating showpiece cakes that were architectural marvels. He showed Marcus his current designs, which were beautiful but functionally limited. What he needed was someone who understood physics and structure, who could figure out how to build a 5-tier cake that looked like it defied gravity, who could translate a client's wild dreams into edible reality. Marcus's mind, dormant for so long, began to wake up. He found himself sketching on the napkins David provided, rough diagrams of support structures and weight distribution, of how you could use dowels and hidden platforms to create illusions of floating layers. He talked about cantilevers and compression and the way architectural principles could be applied to cake design. He was using the part of his brain that had made him good at his old job, the creative problem solving that had once been his greatest strength. David watched him work, watched the transformation from exhausted laborer to engaged designer, and felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what Marcus was meant to do. This was who he was underneath the layers of grief and poverty and bone-deep exhaustion. When can you start? David asked when Marcus finally looked up from his sketches. I'm working construction through the end of the week, Marcus said. I need to give them notice. Finish out my commitment. I can start Monday if that works for you. Perfect, David said. And Marcus, about the pay. I said 25 an hour, but I've been thinking this is going to be a partnership in a lot of ways. You're not just helping me with existing work, you're going to help me build something new. So I want to offer you 30 an hour, with the possibility of profit sharing if this custom division takes off the way I think it will. Marcus's eyes widened. $30 an hour was more than he made at all 3 of his jobs combined. It was enough to quit the warehouse, to quit the construction work, to maybe actually have time to be a father instead of just a provider. David, that's too much. It's what you're worth, David said firmly. And frankly, it's what I can afford to pay someone with your skills. Don't undersell yourself, Marcus. You're not a charity case. You're a talented designer who's been working beneath his abilities because life knocked you down. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm making a smart business decision. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, but he blinked them back. He extended his hand across the table. Thank you. I won't let you down. David shook his hand firmly. I know you won't. Now, there's one more thing I want to talk about. He pulled out a folder from beside his chair and slid it across the table. I've been thinking about Emma. Marcus tensed immediately, his protective instincts flaring. What about her? Easy, David said, his voice gentle. Nothing bad, but you mentioned physical therapy that insurance doesn't cover. I did some research and there's a program at the Children's Hospital, an experimental therapy for spinal injuries that's showing remarkable results. It's not covered by most insurance, but there's a foundation that helps with costs for families, and he opened the folder showing Marcus's pamphlets and printouts. I took the liberty of calling them. With your permission, I'd like to help you apply. They're looking for candidates, and Emma's age and specific injury profile might make her eligible. It doesn't promise miracles, but the success rate for regaining some mobility is encouraged. Marcus stared at the papers, his heart hammering in his chest. He had given up on the idea that Emma might ever walk again. The doctors had been clear that her injury was severe, that the likelihood of recovery was minimal. He had mourned the loss of her mobility the same way he had mourned the loss of his wife, accepting it as a permanent reality that he had to learn to live with. Can't afford false hope, Marcus whispered. If I let myself believe she could get better and then she doesn't, I don't know if I could survive that. I understand, David said, but what if she could? What if there's even a chance? Don't you owe it to her to try? Don't you owe it to yourself? Marcus thought about Emma's face when she talked about not being a burden, about the way she tried to make herself lighter when he carried her up the stairs, about the guilt she carried that was heavier than her small body. He thought about the life she could have if she could walk again, the freedom and independence and normalcy that might be possible. Okay, he said, his voice cracking. Let's apply. Let's try, David smiled. And it was the smile of a man who had just been given the chance to repay an old debt in a meaningful way. Good. I'll help you with the paperwork. We'll do this together. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Marcus gave notice at the construction site, and his boss, A gruff man named Sullivan had clapped him on the shoulder and told him he was glad Marcus was finally getting out. "You're too smart for this work," Sullivan had said. "I knew it from day one. Good luck." He gave notice at the warehouse, and the night manager had simply nodded, unsurprised. The turnover rate was high, and Marcus had lasted longer than most. No exit interview, no farewell party, just a final paycheck and a reminder to turn in his badge. On Friday night, Marcus took the kids out for pizza with his last construction paycheck. It wasn't fancy, just a small local place with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox in the corner. But to the Hayes family, it might as well have been a five-star restaurant. They ordered a large pizza with everything, and Marcus didn't worry about the cost. For the first time in 18 months, he could afford to be generous. Emma and Tommy were glowing with excitement, talking over each other about their week at school, about their friends, about everything and nothing. Marcus watched them and felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to identify it, and when he did, it nearly broke him. It was joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy at being alive and sitting in a cheap pizza place with his kids, knowing that Monday morning he was starting a new job that might actually lead somewhere, that might actually give them a future instead of just grinding survival. "Dad, you're smiling," Emma said, her eyes wide with wonder. Like really smiling, not your fake smile. Marcus hadn't even realized he was doing it. He reached across the table and took both his children's hands. "You know what? I am smiling. Because I have the two best kids in the world and because things are finally starting to look up. We've had a hard time, but I think maybe, just maybe, things are going to get better because of MR. Chun?" Tommy asked, his mouth full of pizza. "Because of a lot of things," Marcus said. "Because of Mercer Chun being kind. Because of your sister being brave. Because of you being the best little brother in the world. Because we didn't give up, even when things were really hard." That night, after the kids were asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and filled out the application for the experimental therapy program. Every question felt like opening a door he had firmly closed, every form a step toward hope that terrified him. But he thought about David's words, about owing it to Emma to try, and he kept writing. Monday morning arrived with the sharp clarity of a new beginning. Marcus woke up at 6:30, a full 2 hours later than he had been rising for his construction job. The luxury of that extra sleep made him feel almost human. He made breakfast for the kids. Actual breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast instead of the usual grab-and-go cereal bars. They sat together at the kitchen table, and for the first time in forever, Marcus wasn't rushing, wasn't watching the clock with growing panic, wasn't already exhausted before the day had truly begun. "You look different, Daddy," Emma observed, tilting her head as she studied him. "Your face looks softer," Marcus laughed. "That's what happens when you actually sleep. You should try it sometime instead of reading under your covers with a flashlight." Emma's guilty expression confirmed what Marcus had suspected. She was staying up too late, probably worrying about things a 9-year-old shouldn't have to worry about. But today wasn't the day to address it. Today was about new beginning, about showing his children that perseverance and hope could actually lead somewhere. He dropped them at school and drove to the bakery, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind already spinning with ideas for cake designs. David had given him access to the files of customer requests they'd had to turn down over the past year, dreams that were too complex or too structurally challenging. Marcus had spent the weekend studying them, sketching possible solutions, letting his dormant creativity wake up and stretch. David was waiting for him when he arrived, and the genuine warmth of his greeting made Marcus realize how long it had been since someone had been truly happy to see him, not out of obligation or pity, but because they valued his presence, his contributions, his mind. "Ready to change some lives with sugar and flour?" David asked, handing him a cup of coffee that was actually good. Not the burnt tar Marcus had been drinking from gas station pots for years. "Ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied. David showed him to a small office space in the back of the bakery, nothing fancy but clean and organized, with a large drafting table, a computer with design software already loaded, and a window that looked out onto a small garden where herbs grew in neat rows. It was a workspace that said, "You matter. Your work matters. You deserve a place that supports creativity. This is yours," David said. "Your domain. I'll bring you the customer requests. You work your magic, and we'll figure out together how to make the impossible possible." The first request was for a wedding cake that looked like a fairy tale castle, complete with towers that needed to be at least 2 feet tall and delicate enough to appear magical, but strong enough to not collapse under their own weight. The bride had been told by 3 other bakeries that it couldn't be done, at least not within her budget. Marcus studied the request, the photographs the bride had provided, the dimensions she wanted. His architectural training kicked in immediately. He saw the load-bearing points, the necessary internal structures, the way you could use a combination of Rice Krispie treats for the towers, coated in fondant to look like stones, supported by dowels driven deep into the base layers. He sketched quickly, his pencil flying across paper, solving problems he hadn't been allowed to solve in years. By lunchtime, he had a complete design with structural notes and a realistic budget, and David looked at it and let out a low whistle. "This is incredible. This is exactly what we need. Can you actually build this?" "With your help on the cake construction, absolutely," Marcus said. "I can engineer it, but I'll need you to handle the actual baking and decorating. My skills are in the structure, not the artistry." "That's why this is going to work," David said, genuine excitement in his voice. "We're complementary. I've got the baking skills, you've got the engineering mind. Together, we can do things neither of us could do alone." It was a philosophy that extended beyond cakes, and both men knew it. It was a philosophy of life, of friendship, of the way humans were meant to function together, supporting each other's weaknesses and celebrating each other's strengths. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus threw himself into his work with an intensity that surprised even him. He had forgotten what it felt like to be good at something, to use his brain instead of just his body, to end a workday mentally tired but creatively satisfied instead of physically destroyed. He designed cakes that looked like they defied physics, structures that made David's customers gasp with delight. Word began to spread through the community about Henderson's Bakery's new custom division, about the impossible requests they could now fulfill. The money started coming in steadily. Marcus's first paycheck was more than he had made in a month of his 3 previous jobs combined. He paid bills that had been sitting in a drawer, marked final notice in angry red letters. He bought Emma and Tommy new winter coats that actually fit, shoes that didn't have holes in them, school supplies that weren't from the dollar store clearance bin. Small things, practical things, but they felt like victories. He also started sleeping through the night for the first time in 18 months. His body stopped aching constantly. The persistent pain in his lower back began to fade. He started looking like himself again, the man he had been before tragedy had carved away everything soft and left only the desperate core of survival. Emma noticed the change in their household immediately. Her father was home for dinner every night. He had energy to help with homework, to read bedtime stories with enthusiasm instead of barely concealed exhaustion. The apartment felt different, lighter, as if the removal of crushing financial pressure had literally changed the air they breathed. And then 3 weeks after Marcus started his new job, the letter arrived. It was from the Children's Hospital regarding Emma's application for the experimental therapy program. Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. Standing in the bakery's kitchen where David had given him privacy to read it, his eyes scanned the formal language, the medical terminology, looking for the answer that would determine his daughter's future. Dear Mr. Hayes, we are pleased to inform you that Emma Hayes has been accepted into the Mobility Restoration Program. Her specific injury profile and age make her an ideal candidate for the treatment protocol. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to schedule an initial consultation and begin the intake process. Marcus read it 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. Accepted. Emma had been accepted. There was a chance, a real chance, that she might walk again. The letter slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor as his knees gave out. He found himself sitting on the cold tile of the bakery kitchen, his face in his hand, sobbing with a relief and hope so intense it was almost painful. David found him there a few minutes later and immediately understood. He sat down beside Marcus on the floor, their backs against the industrial refrigerator, and waited until the storm of emotion passed. She got in? David asked quietly. Marcus could only nod, his voice too thick to speak. That's wonderful. That's amazing. When does she start? I don't know, Marcus managed. I have to call them. I have to set up a consultation. David, what if it works? What if she can walk again? Then we'll celebrate, David said simply. And if it doesn't work, we'll still celebrate who she is right now. But Marcus, you gave her a chance. That's what good fathers do. They give their children chances. That evening, Marcus sat Emma down at the kitchen table, Tommy beside her because they did everything together, and he told them about the letter. He watched Emma's face cycle through disbelief, hope, fear, and finally a cautious, fragile excitement that made his heart ache. Does this mean I might be able to walk again? She whispered. It means we're going to try, Marcus said carefully. The doctors said there are no guarantees, but there's a chance, a real chance. Are you willing to try even knowing it might not work? Emma looked down at her wheelchair, at the device that had become part of her identity, a symbol of everything that had been taken from her. Then she looked at her father, at the hope shining in his eyes, and she made a decision that was far braver than any adult choice Marcus had ever made. Yes, she said, I want to try. The Mobility Restoration Program occupied the entire 3rd floor of the Children's Hospital, a bright, cheerful space that looked nothing like Emma had expected. Instead of sterile white walls and harsh fluorescent lighting, there were murals of forests and oceans, soft natural light streaming through large windows, and equipment that looked more like a futuristic playground than medical devices. The staff wore colorful scrubs decorated with cartoon characters, and everyone spoke to her like she was a person. Not a patient, not a tragedy, not a broken thing to be fixed. Dr. Sarah Martinez, program director, was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence that immediately put Marcus at ease. She sat across from them in her office, Emma's medical files spread on the desk between them, and explained the program with a directness that Marcus appreciated. No false promises, no sugarcoating, just honest assessment and realistic hope. Emma's injury is classified as incomplete, Doctor, Martinez explained, pointing to scans that showed Emma's spine. That means there's still some connection between her brain and the nerves below the injury site. It's not much, but it's something we can work with. The therapy combines intensive physical rehabilitation with electrical stimulation and a new experimental drug protocol that's showing promising results in promoting nerve regeneration. She turned her attention to Emma, speaking directly to her rather than over her head the way so many doctors had. I'm not going to lie to you, sweetie. This is going to be hard, harder than anything you've ever done. Some days you're going to want to quit. Some days You're gonna hate me and every therapist here. But if you stick with it, if you do the work, there's a real chance you could regain some mobility, maybe enough to walk with assistance. Maybe if we're very lucky enough to walk on your own. Emma's fingers gripped the arms of her wheelchair. How long will it take? At least 6 months of intensive therapy, doctor, Martinez said. 3 sessions a week, 2 hours each session. It's a significant commitment and I need to know you're ready for it. I'm ready, Emma said without hesitation. The certainty in her voice surprised Marcus. His daughter, who had spent 18 months adapting to a life in a wheelchair, would learn to accept her limitations with heartbreaking grace, was suddenly ready to fight for something different. The therapy sessions began the following week. Marcus rearranged his schedule at the bakery, coming in early so he could leave by 2 to get Emma to her appointments. David not only supported this completely but insisted on it, reminding Marcus that family always came first. On the first day, Marcus sat in the observation area, watching through a large window as therapists worked with Emma. They started with basic exercises, testing what sensation and movement she still had. Emma lay on a padded table while a young therapist named Jason carefully manipulated her legs, asking her to describe what she felt. At first, there was nothing. No sensation, no response, just the familiar deadness that had become her reality. But then Jason pressed on a specific point on her left foot, and Emma's eyes went wide. I felt that, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. I actually felt it. It was a tiny spark, the faintest hint of sensation in a sea of numbness. But it was something. Jason marked it on his chart with barely contained excitement, and Marcus found himself crying again. This man who had never cried before his wife died and now couldn't seem to stop. Tears of hope streaming down his face as he watched his daughter feel her own foot for the first time in 18 months. The sessions were grueling. Emma worked harder than she had ever worked at anything, sweat dripping down her face as therapists guided her through exercises designed to wake up sleeping nerves and rebuild atrophied muscle. They used electrical stimulation, sending gentle currents through her legs to force the muscles to contract, teaching her body to remember what movement felt like. They had her in a harness suspended over a treadmill, her legs moving in the pattern of walking even though she couldn't control them herself, creating neural pathways through sheer repetition. Some days there was progress, a flicker of voluntary movement in her toe, the ability to feel temperature on her left shin, a muscle contraction that Emma controlled herself, not induced by the machines. Those days were celebrations, tiny victories that felt monumental. Other days were devastating setbacks. Days when Emma worked for 2 hours and felt nothing, accomplished nothing, ended the session sobbing with frustration and exhaustion. Days when her body refused to cooperate, when the nerves stayed stubbornly silent, when the dream of walking felt impossibly distant. On those hard days, Marcus would carry her to the car and hold her while she cried, his own heart breaking as he wondered if he had made a mistake by letting her hope. But then Emma would dry her tears, set her jaw with a determination that reminded him so much of her mother, and say, "Same time next week, Dad. I'm not quitting." Tommy became his sister's biggest cheerleader, drawing pictures of Emma walking that he taped to her bedroom wall, making up songs about strong legs and brave girls, sitting beside her wheelchair and narrating imaginary adventures they would have when she could run again. He was 7 years old and carrying hope for his entire family, and Marcus marveled at the resilience of children, their ability to believe in good outcomes even when adults had learned to expect disappointment. At the bakery, Marcus's work continued to flourish. The custom cake division was rapidly becoming the most profitable part of Henderson's bakery, with requests coming in from all over the state. Marcus designed a cake for a tech company's anniversary that looked like a circuit board, complete with edible LED lights powered by small batteries hidden in the base. He created a birthday cake for a geology professor that was a perfect replica of the Grand Canyon's rock layers, each stratum a different flavor. He built a wedding cake that appeared to float, the tiers held by clear acrylic supports that were nearly invisible, creating the illusion of magic. Each project was a puzzle to be solved, a problem that required both creativity and technical skill, and Marcus discovered that he was happier than he had been since before Sarah's death. He was using his mind again, contributing something meaningful, earning enough money that his children didn't have to worry about whether they could afford groceries. The transformation in his life felt almost too good to be true, and sometimes he woke up at night afraid it would all disappear, that he would blink and find himself back on the construction site, back in the warehouse, back in the grinding poverty that had nearly destroyed him. But then he would hear Emma's breathing in the next room, would remember the feel of her squeezing his hand with her foot during therapy, would think about Tommy's laughter over breakfast, and he would realize that this was real. That kindness and friendship and second chances actually existed in the world, that David Chun's choice to help him, to see him as more than just a janitor or a charity case, had set in motion a chain of events that was literally changing his daughter's future. 3 months into the therapy program, something remarkable happened. Emma was on the suspended treadmill, her legs going through the mechanical motions of walking, when suddenly she felt something different, a connection, a firing of neurons, a moment of voluntary control. Her right leg moved on its own, just a tiny bit, just enough to disrupt the mechanical rhythm. "Wait, stop," she said to Jason, her voice urgent. "My leg. I moved my leg. I did it myself." The therapist immediately stopped the treadmill and called Dr. Martinez. Together, they carefully positioned Emma on a mat, her legs supported but free to move. "Try again, doctor," Martinez said softly. Take your time. Focus on your right leg. Try to bend your knee. Emma closed her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration. Marcus watched from the observation window, hardly daring to breathe. Seconds ticked by, long and agonizing, and then, slowly, impossibly, Emma's right knee bent just a fraction of an inch. Barely visible, but it moved. She controlled it. Her brain sent a signal, and her body obeyed. The observation room erupted. Other parents who had been watching their own children in therapy started crying and applauding. Therapists in the main room were hugging each other. Dr. Martinez was making notes with shaking hands, her professional composure cracking to reveal pure, joyful astonishment. Marcus ran from the observation room to the therapy floor, not caring that he was breaking protocol, not caring about anything except getting to his daughter. He dropped to his knees beside the mat where she lay, and Emma looked at him with tears streaming down her face and the biggest smile he had seen since before the accident. "I did it, Daddy," she sobbed. "I moved my leg. I really did it." "You did it, baby," Marcus whispered, gathering her into his arms. "You're the bravest, strongest person I've ever known." That night, Marcus called David from the hospital parking lot and told him the news. David's whoop of joy was so loud Marcus had to hold the phone away from his ear. "We're celebrating," David declared. "Saturday night, my house, dinner for your whole family. This is happening." "You don't have to do that," Marcus protested, but his heart wasn't in it. He had learned over the past months that accepting kindness was a gift you gave to the giver, that David needed to celebrate this as much as Marcus did. "I absolutely do have to do that," David said. "Marcus, do you understand what this means? A few months ago, your daughter couldn't feel her legs. Now she's moving them. This is a miracle, and miracles should be celebrated with good food and good company." David Chun's house was nothing like Marcus had imagined. He had expected something grand, something that reflected the success of a man who owned a thriving bakery, but instead it was a modest two-story home in a comfortable neighborhood with a garden out front where vegetables grew alongside flowers. It was a home that spoke of priorities, of someone who had learned that happiness wasn't measured in square footage or expensive furnishings, but in the warmth of the spaces you inhabited. David answered the door with a smile that could have lit the entire street, and behind him was a young woman in her early 20s with her father's kind eyes and a welcoming demeanor that immediately put everyone at ease. "This is my daughter, Jennifer," David said, his pride evident in every syllable. "She's home from college. And when I told her about Emma's breakthrough, she insisted on being here." Jennifer knelt down to Emma's eye level, completely unself-conscious about it, and extended her hand. "It's so nice to meet you, Emma. My dad has told me all about how brave you are. I brought you something." She handed Emma a wrapped package, and when Emma opened it, she found a beautiful journal with a tree on the cover, its branches reaching toward a sky full of stars. "It's for recording your journey," Jennifer explained. "My mom gave me one when I was going through a hard time, and writing everything down helped me see how far I'd come. I thought maybe it could help you too." Emma clutched the journal to her chest, her eyes shining. It was such a thoughtful gift, kind that couldn't be bought without genuine care and consideration. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll write in it every day." The house smelled like heaven. David had spent the entire day cooking, preparing a feast that celebrated not just Emma's progress, but the journey they'd all been on together. There was roast chicken with herbs from his garden, homemade pasta with a sauce that had been simmering for hours, fresh bread that was still warm from the oven, and a salad made with vegetables so vibrant they looked like they'd been painted. But the centerpiece, quite literally, was a cake. Not a birthday cake this time, but something David had created specifically for this occasion. It was shaped like a path, winding from one end of the platter to the other, and along that path were small sugar figurines telling a story. At the beginning was a little girl in a wheelchair, and as the path progressed, the figures showed her standing, then taking tentative steps with assistance, and finally, at the very end, a figure of a girl running with her arms spread wide, free and joyful. Emma stared at the cake, at this edible representation of her journey and her dreams, and she started crying. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when someone sees you so completely that they can create art from your story. "Mr. Chun," she managed through her sobs, "this is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever made for me." David's own eyes were suspiciously bright as he came around the table to stand beside her. "You're doing the hard part, Emma. I just get to celebrate it with sugar and butter." They ate like a family, passing dishes and sharing stories and laughing in that easy way that happens when people feel genuinely safe with each other. Jennifer told them about her graduate program in social work, about her desire to help families navigate the complex systems that had nearly broken her own father years ago. Tommy peppered her with questions about college, clearly nursing a small crush on this older girl who treated him like his opinions mattered. Marcus watched it all and felt something shift in his chest, a softness he hadn't allowed himself in so long. After dinner, while Jennifer and Tommy cleared the plates, David pulled Marcus aside onto the back porch. The evening air was cool and carried the scent of late autumn, leaves and wood smoke, and the promise of change. "I need to tell you something," David said, and his tone was serious enough that Marcus felt a flutter of anxiety. "I've been doing some thinking about the bakery. about the custom division, about what we've built together. Marcus's stomach dropped. This was it. The too good to be true part was over. David was going to tell him he couldn't afford to keep him on, or that the partnership wasn't working, or some other truth that would send Marcus tumbling back down into the pit he'd only just climbed out of. But David's next words weren't what he expected at all. I want to make you a partner, an actual partner with equity in the business. The custom division is bringing in more revenue than I ever dreamed possible, and it's because of your vision and talent. This shouldn't be an employer-employee relationship anymore. It should be a partnership. 50-50, all decisions made together, profits split evenly. Marcus stared at him, unable to process what he was hearing. David, that's insane. You built this business. You took all the risk. I've only been here a few months. And in those few months, you've transformed it into something neither of us could have built alone, David countered. Marcus, 15 years ago, you didn't just co-sign a loan. You saved my life. You gave me a foundation to rebuild on. Now I want to give you the same thing. Not as charity, not as repayment, but as a genuine partnership between equals. We're better together than we are apart. That's worth 50% of everything I have. The offer was staggering, life-changing in ways Marcus was struggling to comprehend. A partnership meant stability, meant security, meant Emma and Tommy would never have to worry about whether they could afford food or heat or the basic necessities of life. It meant he wasn't just an employee who could be let go, but a co-owner with a stake in the future. It meant dignity and possibility in everything he had thought was lost forever when Sarah died. I don't know what to say, Marcus admitted, his voice thick. Say yes, David said simply. Say yes, and let's build something remarkable together. Let's show the world that success isn't just about profit margins and market share. It's about lifting each other up, about creating beauty together, about being the kind of business that makes the community better just by existing. Marcus thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, exhausted and hopeless, pushing a cleaning cart through empty office buildings, believing he had nothing left to offer the world. He thought about the kindness of a single cake, the grace of an offered job, the patient belief that he was more than his circumstance. And he thought about the future that was suddenly possible. A future where his children could dream without the crushing weight of poverty limiting their horizons. Yes, he said, and the word felt like a key turning in a lock, opening a door he hadn't known was there. Yes. I want to be your partner. They shook hands, and then, because handshakes weren't enough for a moment like this, they embraced. Two men who had saved each other across 15 years, who had learned that friendship and loyalty and simple human kindness were the strongest foundations you could build on. Inside the house, Jennifer had cut the cake and was serving pieces to Emma and Tommy, carefully giving Emma the slice with the figure of the running girl. Emma held it reverently, not wanting to eat it, wanting to preserve this moment forever. But Jennifer leaned down and whispered something in her ear, and Emma nodded, picking up her fork. What did you say to her? Marcus asked Jennifer later as they were loading the dishwasher together. Jennifer smiled. I told her that the point of the running girl isn't to preserve her in sugar. It's to eat her, to take that dream inside you and make it part of who you are. The cake is beautiful, but the real art is in the living. Marcus looked at this wise young woman who had learned profound truths from watching her own father's journey through darkness and back, and he felt grateful not just for David's friendship, but for the whole family that had welcomed them in. Your father is lucky to have you. We're all lucky to have each other, Jennifer said simply. That's what I'm learning in my program. We're not meant to do this life alone. We're meant to be communities, families of choice, if not blood. People who show up for each other when it matters. That night, as Marcus was loading his sleepy children into the car, Emma clutched her new journal and looked up at her father with serious eyes. Daddy, do you believe I'm going to walk again? It was the question he'd been afraid she'd ask because it required an honest answer that balanced hope with realism. I believe you're going to work harder than you've ever worked and that you're going to make progress that seemed impossible. Whether that means walking completely or walking with assistance or something else entirely, I can't predict. But I believe in you, Emma. I believe in your strength and your courage. And whatever happens, we'll face it together. Emma nodded, satisfied with his answer. I believe in me too, she said. And I believe in Mr. Chun and Jennifer and Dr. Martinez and Jason and everyone who's helping us. I think maybe that's what miracles are, Daddy. They're not magic. They're just lots of people believing in the same thing at the same time and working together to make it happen. 6 months after Emma's first voluntary movement, the world looked entirely different. Not just for the Hayes family, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by their journey. The bakery partnership between Marcus and David was thriving, with custom cake orders booked out 3 months in advance. They had hired 2 additional decorators and were considering expanding into a second location. The business had been featured in a regional food magazine, with a full spread about the unique collaboration between an architect-turned-baker and a baker who believed in second chances. But the real transformation was happening 3 times a week in the therapy room at the Children's Hospital. Emma's progress had been steady and remarkable, defying even Dr. Martinez's cautious optimism. The voluntary movement in her right leg had gradually extended to her left. Sensation had returned to most of her lower body, though it remained patchy and unpredictable. Most significantly, the muscles that had atrophied during 18 months of paralysis were rebuilding, growing stronger with each grueling therapy session. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Emma was was attempting something she hadn't done since before the accident. She was standing, not suspended in a harness, not propped up by multiple supports, but actually standing on her own 2 feet, her hands lightly gripping parallel bars on either side, her entire body trembling with the effort of holding herself upright. Dr. Martinez stood nearby, clipboard in hand, her professional demeanor barely concealing her excitement. Jason, who had been Emma's primary therapist through this entire journey, was positioned behind her, ready to catch her if she fell, but giving her space to do this herself. And Marcus stood in the observation room with his face pressed against the glass, hardly daring to breathe. "You're doing beautifully, Emma, doctor," Martinez said calmly. "Remember your breathing, don't lock your knees. Let your muscles do the work." Emma's face was red with exertion, sweat dripping down her temples, her thin arms shaking as she gripped the bars. She had been standing for 2 minutes, which didn't sound like much until you remembered that her legs had been completely paralyzed, that every second upright was a victory over nerve damage and atrophied muscles, and the cruel physics of a body that had forgotten how to support itself. "Can I try a step?" Emma asked through gritted teeth. Jason and Dr. Martinez exchanged glances. They had planned to work up to walking gradually, to spend several more sessions just on standing, but Emma had never been one to follow the expected timeline. She had pushed herself harder than any patient in the program's history, had shown up for every single session determined to do more than the day before, had refused to accept limitation as permanent. "1 step, doctor," Martinez said carefully. "Just one. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Standing is already a massive achievement." Emma nodded, her entire focus narrowed down to the seemingly simple task of lifting 1 foot and placing it forward. In the observation room, Marcus found Tommy's hand and squeezed it. His 7-year-old son, who had been coming to these sessions whenever school allowed, who had witnessed every setback and celebrated every tiny victory, squeezed back with fierce hope. Emma shifted her weight to her left leg, felt the muscle engage and hold, and then with agonizing slowness she lifted her right foot. It trembled in the air, and for a moment Marcus thought she was going to lose her balance. Thought she was going to fall and have to start over. But then her foot moved forward, just a few inches, and came down solidly on the mat in front of her. She had taken a step, a real, voluntary, self-controlled step. The observation room erupted in cheers. Marcus and Tommy were hugging each other, both crying unashamedly. Other parents who had been watching their own children stopped what they were doing to applaud. In the therapy room, Jason was openly weeping, and even Dr. Martinez had to wipe her eyes before she could write notes on her clipboard. But Emma wasn't finished. The success of that first step had ignited something fierce inside her, some wellspring of determination that wouldn't be satisfied with just one. Before anyone could tell her to stop, before anyone could remind her to rest, she shifted her weight and took another step, then another. She walked 4 steps before her legs gave out and Jason caught her, lowering her gently to the mat where she lay gasping and laughing and crying all at once. "I walked," she kept saying, the words tumbling out in a breathless mantra. "I walked, I walked, I walked." Marcus burst through the observation room door and ran to his daughter, protocol and rules forgotten in the overwhelming tide of joy. He gathered her into his arms, this brave, impossibly strong child who had fought her way back from paralysis through sheer force of will and the support of people who believed in her. "You did it, baby," he sobbed into her hair. "You walked. You actually walked." "I'm gonna walk out of here, Daddy," Emma said, her voice filled with absolute certainty. "I'm gonna walk out of this hospital, and then I'm gonna walk to school, and then I'm gonna run. I'm going to run so fast." It was the kind of declaration that might have sounded like childish fantasy 6 months ago. But now, watching his daughter, who had just defied every medical expectation, Marcus believed her completely. That evening, they celebrated at the bakery after it closed because that's where their family gathered now. David had made cupcakes decorated with little fondant feet, and Jennifer had driven down from college specifically for the occasion, bringing balloons and streamers and the kind of enthusiasm that made everything feel more significant. Tommy had made a banner that said, "Emma walked today," in crayon letters that zigzagged across a long piece of butcher paper. They ate cupcakes and told the story of those 4 steps over and over, each retelling adding new details, new observations, making it more real. Emma sat in her wheelchair, exhausted but glowing, letting the celebration wash over her. She had learned something important today, something that went beyond the mechanics of walking. She had learned that the human body, given the right support and stubborn determination, could rebuild itself. That paralysis wasn't always permanent. That hope, when combined with hard work and the right help, could become reality. Later, while the adults were cleaning up, Emma wheeled herself over to the window where she could see their reflection in the darkened glass. She looked at herself, at the girl in the wheelchair who had walked today, and she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't defined by the chair anymore. She wasn't the paralyzed girl, the tragedy, the victim of the drunk driver. She was Emma Hayes, who had fought her way back from the impossible, who had people who believed in her, who who had a future that was suddenly wide open with possibility. David came to stand beside her, following her gaze to the window. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different everything is from my birthday," Emma said. "When we came to your bakery with $3 and I thought that was all we'd ever have. And now we have this." She gestured around the bakery at her father laughing with Jennifer, at Tommy wearing a cupcake mustache, at the warmth and safety and abundance that had become their reality. "You know what I've learned?" David said, kneeling down beside her wheelchair. "The thing about miracles is they usually look like ordinary kindness. They look like someone deciding to help when they don't have to. They look like showing up 3 times a week for therapy even when progress is slow. They look like a little girl refusing to give up on herself." "Is that what you did for my dad?" Emma asked. "An ordinary miracle?" David smiled. "Your dad did the first miracle 15 years ago when he believed in me. I just gotta return it. That's how miracles work, Emma. They're not one-time things. They ripple out. Your dad's kindness to me meant I could help your family, and someday when you're grown, you'll help someone else. That's how we change the world, one small act of kindness at a time." Emma thought about this, about the chain of compassion that had led to her standing in a therapy room today, taking steps that had seemed impossible. She thought about all the people who had shown up for her family, and she made a promise to herself. Someday, when she could walk again, when she could run, when she had the strength and the resources, she would be someone's miracle. She would be the one who showed up, who believed, who helped someone else find their way back from the darkness. "Mr. Chun," she said softly. "Yes, Emma. When I can walk all the time, when I don't need this wheelchair anymore, can we donate it to another kid who needs it? Can we pass it on to someone else who needs a miracle?" David felt his throat tighten with emotion. This child, who had every right to be bitter and angry about what had been taken from her, was already thinking about how to help others. "It's a beautiful idea, Emma. When the time comes, we'll make sure it goes to someone who needs it. And maybe we can include a note telling them your story, showing them what's possible." 1 year later, on Emma's 10th birthday, the world was different in every way that mattered. The Hayes family had moved into a small house with a ramp leading to the front door, though Emma rarely needed it anymore. The intensive therapy had continued through fall and winter and spring, and by summer Emma was walking independently, her gait still slightly uneven but growing steadier with each passing week. By autumn she was running short distances, her legs remembering the joy of movement that had been stolen from them. The bakery had expanded into a second location, with Marcus and David's partnership becoming a model for the kind of business success that lifted up entire communities. They employed 15 people now, many of them, like Marcus had been, people who needed a second chance. People who had been written off by the world but still had something valuable to offer. David insisted on it, and Marcus agreed completely. They paid fair wages, offered benefits, and created a workplace where people felt valued rather than exploited. But more than the business success, more than the money or the stability or the house with a ramp, what mattered most was the family they had become. Not just Marcus, Emma, and Tommy, but David and Jennifer too. And the expanding circle of people whose lives had been touched by the simple act of kindness that started with $3 and a birthday cake. The party for Emma's 10th birthday was held at the original bakery, in the same space where, 1 year ago, a desperate father and his paralyzed daughter had walked in with almost nothing and walked out with everything. The small dining area had been decorated with balloons and streamers, and there was a table full of gifts, but the centerpiece was the cake David had created for the occasion. It was magnificent, a two-tier creation that told a story in fondant and butter. The bottom tier showed a bakery with a little girl in a wheelchair outside the window, and the top tier showed the same girl standing on top of a mountain, her arms raised in victory, the wheelchair at the base being offered to another child. It was their journey rendered in sugar and artistry, a testament to how far they had come. But the guests at this party were what made it truly special. Dr. Martinez was there along with Jason and several other therapists who had worked with Emma. There were kids from Emma's school, friends who had supported her through the hardest year of her life. There were employees from the bakery who had become like extended family. And there were 3 other children in wheelchairs, kids who had been accepted into the mobility restoration program through a scholarship, a fund that Marcus and David had established, named in Sarah's honor. Emma, wearing a new dress and standing on her own 2 feet, looked around at the gathering and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. A year ago, she had believed that her life would be defined by limitation, by loss, by the things she couldn't do. Now she stood in a room full of people who had taught her that limitations were just invitations to fight harder, that loss could be transformed into purpose, and that what she could do was so much more than she had ever imagined. Marcus stood beside David, watching his daughter hold court, telling the younger kids in wheelchairs about her therapy journey with the kind of encouraging honesty that could only come from someone who had lived it. "It's really hard," she was saying. Some days you'll want to quit, but you can't quit because every day you keep trying is a day you're getting stronger. And you have to believe that your story isn't over yet, that there are chapters still to be written." "She's remarkable," David said softly. "Both your kids are. You raised them right, Marcus." "We raised them right," Marcus corrected. "You're as much a part of their lives now as anyone. Your family." David's eyes glistened. It was the acknowledgement he hadn't known he needed, the confirmation that the bond they had built was permanent and real. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me in, for letting me be part of this." Jennifer approached them, carrying a large flat package wrapped in brown paper. "Emma, this is from all of us," she said, presenting it to the birthday girl. "Go ahead and open it." Emma tore off the wrapping carefully, and inside was a framed photograph that Jennifer had taken secretly over the past year. It was a collage of moments. Emma in her wheelchair at the bakery counter with $3 in her hand. Emma's first day of therapy, looking scared and determined. Emma standing for the first time, her face red with effort. Emma taking her first steps. Emma walking out of the hospital without assistance. Emma running in the park, her hair flying behind her, her face split by a huge grin. And in the center, a candid shot of Emma and Marcus hugging after a therapy session, both of them crying happy tears. It's called The Journey, Jennifer explained, because you're not defined by where you started or where you ended up. You're defined by every brave step you took in between. Emma stared at the collage, at the visual representation of the hardest and most transformative year of her life, and she felt something profound settle in her chest. This was her story, not a tragedy, not a tale of victimhood, but a story of resilience and community and the transformative power of people choosing to show up for each other. When it came time to cut the cake, David asked Emma to say a few words first. She stood before the gathered crowd, no longer the shy, hurting girl who had come into the bakery a year ago, but someone stronger. Someone who had learned that vulnerability and strength could coexist, that accepting help was an act of courage, and that her worth wasn't determined by what her body could or couldn't do. Last year, Emma began, her voice clear and steady, I came to this bakery on my birthday with $3. That's all we had, and I thought that meant we had nothing. But Mr. Chun taught me something that day. He taught me that the most valuable things in life aren't things you can buy. They're things people give you freely, out of kindness, out of love, out of believing that your story isn't finished yet. She looked at her father, at the man who had worked himself to exhaustion to give her a chance. My dad has always been my hero, but this year I got to watch him become a hero to himself too. I got to watch him accept help, build something beautiful, and remember that he's more than just someone who takes care of us. He's someone with dreams and talents and worth. She turned to David. And Mr. Chun showed me that miracles are real, not the magic kind, but the kind that happen when someone decides to be kind even though they don't have to be. The kind that ripple out and change everything. Finally, she addressed the 3 children in wheelchairs, who were watching her with the kind of desperate hope she recognized from her own reflection a year ago. To anyone who's in a chair right now, who feels like they'll never walk again, who thinks their life is over, I want you to know something. Your story isn't finished. It might feel like it is, but it's not. There are people who believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself yet. And every single day that you don't give up is a victory. Every therapy session, every painful exercise, every tiny bit of progress, it all matters. You matter. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Marcus had his arm around David's shoulders, both men openly weeping. Jennifer was recording on her phone, knowing this was a moment that deserved to be preserved. The children in wheelchairs were nodding, taking in Emma's words like life-giving water. Emma picked up the knife to cut the cake, and as she did, she looked at the fondant figure of herself on top of the mountain and made a promise. She would spend her life being someone's miracle. She would show up for people the way people had shown up for her. She would remember that kindness wasn't a transaction, but a gift that was meant to be passed forward, creating ripples that would extend far beyond anything she could imagine. They ate cake and celebrated and told stories late into the evening. When it was time to go home, Marcus carried a tired but happy Tommy to the car while Emma walked beside him on her own 2 feet, her gait strong and sure. David stood in the doorway of his bakery watching them go and felt a profound sense of completion. 15 years ago, Marcus had saved his life. A year ago, David had returned the favor, and now they were bound together in a way that transcended debt or obligation. They were family chosen and cherished, proof that the most powerful force in the world wasn't money or status or success. It was the simple, radical act of seeing someone's worth and choosing to invest in it. It was the courage to accept help and the grace to offer it. It was the understanding that we're all just $3 away from needing a miracle, and we're all capable of being someone else's miracle if we choose to show up. Emma Hayes had walked into Henderson's Bakery 1 year ago with $3 in a wheelchair. She walked out with a family, a future, and the knowledge that she was loved beyond measure. And that, in the end, was worth more than all the money in the world, and that's a wrap on this story. But you know, the conversation doesn't have to end here. Let us know down below what part of the world this reached today, and maybe one word that says how it made you feel. And what we're trying to do here is build a home for stories that actually matter. Stories about getting back up, about the quiet kind of strength that comes from community, and about how a single act of kindness can change everything. If this story touched you, a like would mean the world. It tells us that these stories matter, that they're reaching people who need them. Thank you for spending your time here with Emma and her family. Until we meet in another tale, remember to be the kindness you want to see in the world.